Hey, everybody. Happy Hump Day. It's the Podcast Daily. It is a Wednesday for you, halfway to Ohio State and Arkansas State on Saturday. A huge one, Bill Landis. Just a massive showdown in the Horseshoe.
Pretty sure LeBron's going to be there. I'm looking forward to it.
2 weeks in a row for him. You got to love to see that. He's Bill. I am Austin Ward. Getting into it again to take one more brief look back at Notre Dame, and then we're going to fast forward it a little bit with what we think might be maybe a more comfortable win for Ohio State and a chance to expand that rotation, the lineup. I'm sure that sounds a little bit funny since I've been advocating for not using as many sub packages and personnel groupings, but we'll get into that contradiction in my own brain later on. As you take one more look back at Notre Dame, Bill, who boosted their stock the most in your mind?
There are a lot of guys to choose from. I guess I'll say one that we haven't been talking about as much this week, and that's Paris Johnson. I thought he had a really nice debut game against what is a pretty formidable veteran defensive line. Isaiah Foskey was the guy that I think a lot of us were curious what sort of impact he'd have on the game, and the answer kind of felt like not much. And I know CJ was knocked off his spot a couple times, but he was only sacked once. That sack was not Paris's fault. And I thought he kind of handled himself really well in some tough matchups. And I won't say I went back and watched all of his snaps individually, although I probably will at some point because I'm a sicko. But what I did catch in rewatching the game and watching it live was a guy who just looked very comfortable, didn't appear to have any sort of jitters playing his first, big time college football game at left tackle. And I thought it was a really good start for him.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Paris Johnson really played at a high level, and he'd been sort of in this locked in mode. We've been talking with Paris Johnson, for a while about maybe doing some things with the podcast. And it was like, no, nothing is happening until after Notre Dame. Just completely locked in and focused on that because he knew how important that would be. I mean, it's his junior season, almost certainly going to be declaring for the draft after this year if things go even remotely close to plan. A couple great defensive linemen, NFL caliber defensive linemen that were going to be on that Notre Dame team who had a lot to say about their matchup and their ability to come at Paris Johnson or DeJuan Jones. I think it wasn't a game where I felt like Paris Johnson buried a bunch of people in the dirt, Orlando Pace style, but I didn't feel like, again, I haven't watched every single one of his snaps, but didn't feel like there was a lot of pressure coming from the left side. Didn't feel like he was out of position, scrambling, getting hit, obviously didn't get hit with flags, be the false starts or holding. Thought it was a clean game, and that's what you need from a left tackle if you're trying to make a lot of money come next April.
The no penalties things was key. I thought maybe a guy like that would be a little too amped up and maybe get flagged once or twice for a holding penalty or something like that. And it didn't happen. He played a physical game, but he did so without drawing, I guess, that kind of attention to him, which is a good thing.
I think tight end probably would be where I'd go. They didn't do a heck of a lot. And also the fact that you didn't have to notice them in this game, especially when they were blocking some in the second half as Ohio State started asserting its will, is important. Got a little bit of clarity that I think you and I both thought that Mitch Rossi would maybe be more important than people expected. I know we had some questions on Rivals at Dotting the I's about where's Joe Royer. I got the sense in the last couple of weeks leading up to this game that for Joe Royer, G. Scott, the opener, that wasn't really going to be a game for them. That Mitch Rossi has done enough, can do enough if they needed to throw to him a couple times this season, not a couple times a game, that he could do that. Cade Stover had the one-handed grab, and I think his rise to be that tight end that can be involved and on the field in any situation shouldn't be overlooked. It's pretty significant. I know that Kevin Wilson likes to give a little bit of grief to you and sometimes by proxy me, because it seemed like this team had the potential to play 4 or 5 wide receivers. And when it comes down to it, I think their identity and what they like to do is based around 12 personnel as much as they can get away with it.
Kevin Wilson walked off the field after the game on Saturday up the tunnel, and you and I were standing there, and he turned in our general direction and said, "Who said it had to be a track meet?" But I'm pretty sure he was just talking to me. And I feel a little misunderstood there.
He made sure that I didn't hear him right away, and he came over, and you're like, "Hey, that's Kevin Wilson has something to say." I'm like, "Well, when did I say that it had to be a track meet? How did I get lumped into that?" And then
I
I walked up the tunnel with him, and he had one more thing to say about that, which was, "We can get down and dirty."
That's right. That's right. And listen, I believe him, and I like to see it. My general premise was, if you're not going to use the tight end position so much, then why do we talk about it so much? But if they're going to play a lot of 12, let's talk about tight ends. I'm down for it. I thought both Kate and Mitch played very well, and I thought it was telling that when CJ Stroud lost Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is obviously a trusted target over the middle of the field, he went to Cade Stover a couple of times because you need to be able to work in that area, even if Jackson's not available, and Cade delivered. So that was big time for him.
You're definitely misunderstood. Tight ends are the next best thing to offensive linemen, right?
That's what they're offensive linemen who catch passes. Like what are we talking about? I love tight ends.
Yeah. Trying to tackle Cade Stover doesn't seem like that'd be a fun experience.
No, he's I get what he was talking about when he said he wanted to bring a defensive mentality to playing offense.
We saw that. All right. If you are not allowed to take Mike Hall, who else on defense boosted their stock the most?
Ronnie Hickman, probably. As you alluded to in the question that you asked of Perry Eliano on Tuesday afternoon, was there ever a play where Ronnie was out of position? And Perry chuckled in a way that was like, well, no, there wasn't a play where he was out of position. Just always around the ball. And I think when you combine how he performed with what we know of all the responsibilities that Jim Knowles has put on his plate, it was a really impressive game. I know he maybe didn't light up the stat sheet the way some other guys did. I think Tommy obviously had more tackles. I think Lathan Ransom might have had more tackles as well. But Ronnie was in on almost every play. He was never out of position. He was getting guys lined up. Just seemed to really have a great sense of what was happening out there. Didn't look like anything surprised him. So I guess it's not surprising to see him do that because we know he's a really smart player and he played well last year. Probably their most consistent and best defensive player last year. So for him to perform that way makes sense. But I thought when he's put in a position to kind of like be the captain out there of getting everybody lined up, and then he played that well on top of it, I think his stock is certainly on the rise.
It can be a little bit of a problem if your safety is your leading tackler. Like, doesn't
yes.
You can be a good player and they bring you up in the box slot. Maybe sometimes statistically you can have a good defense with a great safety who makes a lot of tackles for you, but I don't think that was the case for Ohio State last year. It did show that Ronnie Hickman was capable of doing that, but he sort of joked about it during camp, like the way that the front four was playing, the way that Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers were saying. He's like, sometimes I'm coming down there and I'm like, hey guys, leave a tackle for me. Like I want to make one.
Right.
And that's a good sign that he doesn't have to. That means that whether that's Ronnie Hickman in the back or Lathan Ransom or Josh Proctor, when he bounces back a little bit, which I expect that he will, that they get to be more of the eraser and the safety net the way Jordan Fuller got to be a few years ago. Like, you don't want to be hearing your free or strong safety's name over and over and over again. Like that probably means they're getting to the third level more than you want them to.
Yeah, well, I think that is true. That's like a good general rule of thumb. But I also thought both Ronnie and Lathan looked very comfortable when they were down around the line of scrimmage too. So I think you're right. You don't want those guys spending their entire life cleaning up other people's mistakes, but
right.
they can be trusted down near the line of scrimmage, not be afraid to kind of throw their face in there when it can get kind of physical and probably a little crazy at times. I think that bodes well for the defense.
I already talked about Cam Brown immediately after the game and then also on Monday and then at Roosters. So I don't know if I'm even allowed to say that again for the stock watch, but he was
Played
really
well, man.
He was really good on Saturday night, Bill. That's about where I'll leave it. Exchanged some messages with somebody close to Cam Brown about how well he was feeling coming out of that game on Saturday night. He was really, whoever it was really excited about the way they played for a debut. And it went kind of the way that I thought. I'm happy for him to have that opportunity. We've talked about sort of the way we cover the team and that you get to know some of these kids for a very long time. And when they deal with adversity and the stuff that they go through, Cam Brown deserves a chance to show what he can do. And I thought that he made the most of that on Saturday night. I mean, if teams are going to be, you know, afraid of Denzel Burke, Cam Brown is going to feast. But I really felt like Notre Dame thought that their best option was to try and go towards Denzel Burke. But there was a small sample size because, as was hammered home on Tuesday, it was only 49 plays. So that can be skewed a little bit. But, when, especially that play in the second half when Cam Brown drew the offensive pass interference, you can't get better coverage than that.
Yeah, that was really good coverage. And I liked the play too, where it was probably more of a late thrown ball than anything, but he had good coverage on Mayer on the outside, kind of near the sticks, looking for a first down. The pass was incomplete. Michael Mayer's on the ground, and Cam Brown just kind of like stood over him for a little bit, like just like half a second. I'm sure he said something, but I like that. We've talked about the saltiness that Cam Brown brings to the table. I thought there was a little taste of it there.
Yeah, he's a confident young man. All right, that will lead into a smooth segue here because maybe Ohio State will be in a situation on Saturday where Cameron Brown and Denzel Burke don't have to play every snap. 44-point favorites in the horseshoe. This should be one of those tune-ups or experimental opportunities or get rep games to evaluate for younger players, and there won't be anything wrong with that. Nothing I can criticize, fairly or otherwise. Who would you most like to see get involved a little bit on Saturday, Bill, that could help this team in the long run?
Chip Trainum, and if I can combine him with CJ Hicks, maybe I'd say both those guys. Neither one of them got on the field against Notre Dame. It was basically just Tommy Eichenberg, I think, every snap, and then Steele Chambers and Cody Simon kind of rotating at the will position. And Chip Trainum had a play on that opening kickoff where he just he flew downfield, he blew the guy up, he was going crazy on the sideline, just brought a lot of juice, and that was I think a little bit of a tease of what he could one day bring to the linebacker position. I totally get why those guys didn't play against Notre Dame because you want your most trusted guys out there, and I think Chip and CJ both have to start banking maybe a little more with the coaching staff to get more high leverage reps, but this feels like, or at least, I think people are hoping that this game will be a good opportunity for guys like that to get on the field. So, and I just want to see with a guy with Chip's athletic profile does when you sort of set him loose at the linebacker position, because I think that could be really fun.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked so much about, Steele Chambers and coming over from running back to linebacker. The athletic profile of Steele Chambers seems more like Chip Trainum than it does Cody Simon. And I think you would understand why in game one, the defensive staff would be like, oh, let's lean a little bit more on the experience. And it may have been too much to ask Chip Trainum to go out there and play defense after it's been 3 years since high school when he's done it last. That would have been a pretty tall order. It still took several weeks before the last coaching staff felt comfortable with Steele Chambers turning him loose in those situations. So I think you can kind of understand that, but now you've got two opportunities where there should be learning reps available at linebacker. I think the same could be true at corner. We talked about the strong camp that J.K. Johnson had, Jair Brown getting a black stripe off. I think in this game, Ohio State's really going to want to see what they have available at corner. Same could be true for Cameron Martinez. I'm not sure how they'll juggle that, if they want to see him in the nickel or continuing to do some of the corner stuff that he did at times during August. Jordan Hancock is still trying to get fully healthy. We touched on the availability report now. Even if you're not on it, doesn't mean that you're fully ready to go. He wasn't on Saturday, obviously. So I don't know where he'll land on that by this weekend, but there are certainly a lot of other guys in the secondary that I think are going to need some experience in the next 2 weeks just in case, because anything can happen. And that's not, especially at corner, a spot where Ohio State has a tremendous amount of depth behind those top two.
Yeah, that's a good spot to look. Safety, I think, is another one. I think if they get the chance, they're going to try to put Sonny Styles in a game, and I'm not so sure. I thought that would be the case coming into the season, but just the way they talk about him now, even though he is 17 years old and should be playing on Friday night in Pickerington, I think if they can get him on the field, they'll try to. And then I guess I'll go over to offense. If they can find a way, if it gets to the point where they can get the second team offensive line into the game, I'd be very curious to watch a guy like Zen Mohalski, who we've talked about quite a few times. Is he capable of being a tackle for this team next year if they need him to be? That question won't be answered in a couple of snaps against Arkansas State or next week against Toledo if he gets them. but I just want to watch him play a little bit and see kind of how he moves, how he handles the physicality, what it's like to go up against somebody who's not an Ohio State defensive lineman. Maybe it'd be a little easier for him if he has some struggle if he has some struggles during camp. So there are some guys up and down this roster who I think we all believe could have key roles next year, and this will be our first chance, hopefully, to get a look at them.
Sure seems like there'll be an opportunity at wide receiver as well. Again, Jackson Smith and Jigba doesn't need to play, probably won't. I would be surprised if he does this week. We'll see for Toledo what they choose to do the following weekend. But, Ohio State doesn't have to risk anything with Julian Fleming either, with that lower body injury that he's dealing with and working through now, not just the shoulders that popped out, the other one again during camp last month. Cameron Babb had that big leg brace on in pregame warmups last week. So you're removing those three guys from the equation potentially. And Ohio State didn't seem to want to push it with the true freshman wide receivers last week. It's a different animal. You want to get up and get some reps. I think you could see a Caleb Brown, Caleb Burton, maybe that situation where those guys get involved. Less stress, put it that way. And who knows? Maybe it'll be Kyle McCord throwing to him, and we'll get different evaluations. Yeah. I mean, that's another one where I know you're very curious about what a year or two looks like for Kyle McCord and how important that is to set the foundation up. Not only is the backup quarterback if something were to happen to CJ Stroud, but also for the future of this program at the most important position on the field. There's going to be, I think, a lot of interest in seeing Kyle McCord in some of these settings in the next couple of weeks.
I hope if we do see Kyle McCord, and my guess is that we will see him at some point over the next 2 weeks, probably in both games, that they still treat it like it's a real game and not just let's run the clock out time. Like, let him run a little bit of the offense, see what he can handle, see what he can't. Because I felt like obviously he had to start against Akron, that's one thing, but in his backup reps last year, it didn't feel to me like they were giving him a whole lot. And I suppose I understand why that's the case. But now that he's in his second year, I'm assuming has the offense down, or certainly more than he did last year, that it looks more like the normal Ohio State offense, even if it's, a bunch of twos out there.
And probably on special teams, excuse me, at Parker Fleming _ may need to try something else in this game. Emeka Egbuka is an amazing athlete, and watching him field punts over his head is a dazzling display of hand-eye coordination. It's also got to be terrifying if your livelihood is depending on this young man not fumbling a punt, running 20 yards backwards towards his own end zone. I did not think, as great of an athlete as Emeka Egbuka is, that he looked very comfortable as a punt returner.
I wonder, because I think Emeka played baseball, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was like a pretty good baseball player. If he's doing like the Torrey Hunter thing where you like intentionally play shallower than you should,
you can't hit it over my head.
Every ball that's hit your way looks like the most amazing catch ever. So maybe because literally every punt he caught, except for the one that was kicked short, he caught on a full sprint over his shoulder, like someone threw him a deep ball. Like, that's not the way to field punts. So I'm with you there. Maybe stop doing that, because I feel like that can come back to bite you sometime.
You and I were sitting there, and I started I'm just counting the hash marks. I'm like, he's only 30 yards away from the line of scrimmage. What is he doing? Like, I don't know who told him to stand there, but I mean, I need some answers.
Maybe the Notre Dame punter had not showed himself capable of kicking the ball more than 30 yards on film, and then he just came in and started booming them.
Got him a couple times, and then he shanked sort of that last one, a low line drive, and I don't know. I used to think a long time ago, like, if you could catch a kickoff, you could catch a punt, and you should just use your best guy there regardless. It feels like maybe, and I'll defer to your punt expertise, but there's more difficulty to it as teams have evolved with their way that they approach the punt game, and different coverage schemes and rugby style and all this other thing. Maybe you should just specialize one or the other.
I would imagine that it's different because the picture in front of you obviously is very different when you're trying to field a punt. But then also I think you can do more things to the football. You can end over end it, probably or give it more of a spiral than you would on a traditional kickoff. So I've actually never thought of it that way. but I bet it is very different. Actually, it would be interesting to ask Emeka when we talk to him on Wednesday about that. But mostly, I just want to know, like, why are you lining up 30 yards away from the punter?
Yeah, we've got questions, and we've got questions for Parker Fleming. So let's just ask him. Everybody out there on social media, like, what are we going to do at punt return in week 2, Parker? Are we going to see Cameron Martinez, for example? Could be anybody. Just hit him up. Let's see if we can get a question, because I don't expect that Parker will be available to the media tonight in the middle of the week, a Wednesday. We'll have to wait till later in the season probably. So maybe we'll get some answers on social media. You guys have been doing a great job the last couple of weeks. Just hit up Parker Fleming for us. See if you can get us some answers.
He really appreciates it, from what I can tell. So yeah, please keep hitting him up.
Yeah, it's fun. We have fun here on the podcast. And thank you all for joining us again on the Podcast Daily. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll have full coverage, evening availability, and some snap judgments coming after that. So Ohio State and some players meeting with us at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. After they're done, they're preparing for Arkansas State on Saturday. So are we. That's Bill. I'm Austin. We'll see you tomorrow.